For most players, the best routes in the world are actually one of the fastest ways to brick your own keys. This sounds backwards, right? Surely the best Mythic Plus players in the world are using the best possible routes, so why wouldn't the rest of us just copy them? Well, because these routes aren't built for normal groups. They're built for teams that are doing absurd damage, coordinating their stops properly, handling more dangerous pulls, and playing at a level where shaving off a few extra seconds is actually worth the added risk. For the rest of us mere mortals, the same route changes from efficient to straight up inting. So today I want to break down why the top M+ players route the way that they do, why those same routes often fall apart at lower level keys, and what I think a good route should actually prioritize depending on the key level that you're playing at. I'll also show you some pug-friendly Midnight Season 1 routes that I recommend doing, as well as the level at which they can be used at. I've earned the 0.1% title on 3 separate occasions, so I've seen firsthand why top routes are built the way that they are, and why the same logic often does not translate to lower level keys. I think it's first worth talking about what actually makes a route fast. Generally speaking, a faster route gets through the dungeon in fewer total pulls. Higher level teams will usually achieve this in 2 main ways. The obvious one is just pulling bigger. More mobs means more count per pull, which means fewer pulls overall. The second is choosing mobs that give better count relative to their health pool. This matters a lot more in dungeons like Pit and Mysara Caverns currently, where you've got a bit more freedom to choose which packs you're actually taking. You can actually see this pretty clearly in Mythic dungeon tools through the efficiency score. For example, these Maya Laborers give 0.16% for 4.2 million HP, whereas the Soul Eaters give 2.47% for 9.8 million HP. So you're getting roughly 15 times the count for a bit over double the HP. Obviously, that's a lot more efficient. Before we go any further, I think it's worth chatting about an important trade-off that comes in with routing. Efficiency and risk are usually pretty closely related. If you do every pull 1 pack at a time, the route is incredibly safe, but also really inefficient. On the other hand, if you tried to do the whole dungeon in 1 gigantic pull, the efficiency would obviously be insane, but the chance of failure would almost be guaranteed. That trade-off is important because higher level Mythic Plus teams are not just taking on extra risk for the fun of it. They're doing it because, at very high key levels, the timer becomes a genuine limiting factor. If we look at this graph on screen, let's say a plus 18 Elgathar Academy has a time requirement here. A perfectly executed safer route might land here, while a perfectly executed faster route lands here. In this situation, it becomes very obvious why a high-level push team would choose the riskier option. Yes, it has a higher chance of failure, but the problem is that the safer route doesn't just lower the chance of success, it actually makes the key genuinely impossible, full stop. So when top teams are choosing these more aggressive routes, they're not usually doing it arbitrarily. They're doing it because at the level that they are at, the safe option often isn't even an option for them at all. Now, for the actual meat of the issue, if we go back to the same risk efficiency graph from before, but this time we apply it to a lower level key, let's say a plus 13, the time requirement drops substantially. Once that happens, the problem with copying the top end route becomes pretty obvious. You simply don't need that level of efficiency anymore. So, if you choose the more aggressive route, what you're actually doing is adding a much higher risk of failure without actually needing that extra efficiency to time the key in the first place. And I think this is something that's not always immediately obvious to people. In WoW, and honestly a lot of other areas, the approach used by the very best players in the world is often not automatically the best approach at every single level. If you started going to the gym tomorrow as a beginner and tried to follow Chris Bumstead's exact training split and diet, you would probably either burn out, injure yourself, or just hate the process entirely. That approach makes sense in the context of someone who is competing for Mr. Olympia, but it doesn't automatically make sense for everybody else. This is basically the same with Mythic Plus routing. I'm not saying that we should ignore what the top teams are doing. Far from it, the principles behind what they are doing is actually really, really relevant. Instead, what we should be doing is taking the principles behind these top-end routes and applying them to the level that we're actually playing at. Going back to our gym example, Chris Bumstead's principles probably revolve around things like a clean diet and high protein intake and consistency and lifting heavy things regularly. With Mythic Plus, the same idea applies. The principle is not copy the route that this really cool streamer did. The principle to the route is to make it efficient enough to make the key possible, while also not being unnecessarily risky. So if the goal is to find a route that balances both efficiency and risk, the obvious question then becomes, how do we actually do that? To help with this, I'm going to provide what I'd call safe routes for each of the 8 dungeons this season, and then show you how you can modify them yourself as the key level goes up. I'll show you where to find these routes in a moment, but I first want to demonstrate the actual thought process behind adjusting them, because I think that's the most important part other than just copying the route itself. So let's use Algathar Academy as an example. On the left, we've got my safe route, and on the right, we've got the route that is being used currently by the top teams in the world. Now, let's say you reach a key level where the timer does start to get a little bit tight. The question now becomes, how do I gradually adapt this route to become more efficient without inheriting an insane level of risk? And this is really the key idea of this video. You don't need to jump straight from a safe route to a top-end push route. What you want to do is identify parts of the dungeon where you can add an extra bit of efficiency cleanly, and then layer that bit by bit until the key is actually timeable with that new route. So with Academy, let's walk through a few examples of what this actually looks like. So the first obvious difference with Academy is the choice to go either left or right. Now, if you are getting to a level where you feel like you as the tank, or your group at the very least, can handle this entire room in one pull, that is a very easy way to combine everything all into one. So what we can do is start to group these together. Now, if we're doing this all in one, you then might think that it's going to be more efficient to go north instead. The difference here is that you will want to lust this pull. So instead, we might then go, okay, we're going to be going north. So we might then start to remove some of these additional packs here and add in some of these backpacks like this. So we now have all of a sudden gotten a route that has removed a pull entirely, which is going to make it much, much faster, but also not inherited a huge amount of risk. We're not doing any jumbo pulls that the top end guys are doing. Now, let's say, okay, we do this route and it's still not quite fast enough for the key level that we're at. What we might do instead is look back here. We've got these 2 pulls here that in the top end route are somewhat smushed together. So we might instead go, okay, let's combine these together. Now, obviously the pull orders are out of whack here, but like the principle sort of remains the same. So we've now condensed this down into one less pull again. Now, if we removed these, we've effectively cleaved off 3 pulls compared to the first route that we were doing. This is now starting to look somewhere closer to a genuine like high level route. And realistically, the only difference here is that we're not doing this really weird snap birds onto the mini boss strategy. That's sort of one of those ones where it's like a really interesting piece of tech. What the top end guys are doing is actually getting an evoker to like double glide Breath of Aeons and then Wernstone back to get these to snap back over. Definitely not necessary at lower levels of keys. So you might then look at this and go, okay, well, this is now looking fast enough, but maybe we needed to make it even faster. So we're now starting to get into very dangerous territory, but something like this is going to start looking like a much, much faster route. This is basically how I'd recommend approaching all routes in Mythic Plus. Start with a safer variant, whether it be one of mine or one that you've put together yourself, and then slowly increase the risk and complexity as the key level demands it. As for when you should actually start adjusting these routes, a pretty good reference point is the Raider.io cutoffs page, which I'll link in the description. If you scroll down, you'll see that there's a percentage of players who have timed every dungeon at a given key level. Broadly speaking, if that number is still above 3%, your route is probably fast enough. At that point, you usually don't need to start forcing extra complexity just for the sake of it. Obviously, you can also use your own experience here. If you play with a consistent group and you're starting to notice that the timer is getting genuinely tight, even with clean runs, that's another sign that you might need to squeeze a bit more efficiency out of your current route. But as a general rule, I think the Raider IO cutoff is a pretty good guideline to work from. I've also compiled all of my safe routes along with the MDT export strings into a PDF on my website. If you go to the Dungeon Guides tab, scroll down and click the link at the bottom here, it'll download the PDF with all of the route information in one place. While I'm on the topic of the dungeon guides, I've also got a bunch of extra information I still need to add to these pages based on feedback and a few weeks of actually pushing keys. I just haven't had the time to fully update everything yet because, quite frankly, I've been no-lifing keys for the last fortnight. But if you want some dungeon cheat sheets which dynamically update and show you what your class utility does depending on what you're playing, definitely check those out as well. I hope you found this video informative. Let me know how your Mythic Plus season has been going so far. I am absolutely loving Retribution Paladin at the moment. The execution sentence changes giving us actual funnel damage makes me feel like I'm in legitimate heaven. A huge thank you, as always, to my YouTube channel members and Buy Me a Coffee supporters. The Joy of Checks, Tobias, and Yalem at the Keystone Legend tier, as well as everyone else for supporting the channel. You guys are amazing. Best of luck in your Mythic Plus endeavors, gamers. Until next time, take care.